Hello and welcome to this discussion on your IP or future with Creative First. Our first speaker, Parveen Dusanj Bedi, is the founder of Creative Nation, a Mumbai-based film, web series, and digital production company focused on fiction and non-fiction. She was a producer of Bad Boy Billionaires, a top-rated four-part docu-series commissioned by Netflix for Minnow Films, which went on to win the Filmfare OTT Award in India for Best Non-Fiction Series. She has also produced and was the showrunner for MX's successful historical series Sai Baba. Parveen has worked as a consultant on social policy and social issues affecting the United Kingdom. She was also on the board of directors at Medway Human Rights and Equality Council. She holds a BA Honours in Political with Social Economics from Goldsmiths College, University of London. Parveen, welcome to this discussion.
Thank you. What a wonderful welcome. Thank you. Lovely intro.
Our second speaker, Jamshed Mistry, is an experienced counsel and founder of the International Legal Alliance, a virtual global network of lawyers. He has a demonstrated history of working in the law practice industry and skilled in various types of litigation, international law, media, and entertainment law. Jamshed is a member of the Bombay Bar Association, the Intellectual Property Rights Practitioners Association, Maximum Lawyer Group, and associate member of the Canadian Bar Association. He is also advisory member of the South Asian Fashion Week in Vancouver and the Vancouver International South Asian Film Festival. Jamshed, welcome to this discussion.
Thank you so much.
Parveen, what is your opinion about, producing a movie in the UK vis-a-vis India? And if you could share your experiences with respect to what people should keep in mind in terms of contracts and, what are the other legal aspects that they should keep in mind?
Okay. In terms of contracts and legal, I think India, let's just start by saying India is a lot more litigious than the UK. So you have to bear that in mind when you are picking up any kind of stories, creative content. I think here, abroad, you can make something like The Crown quite easily because it's in public domain and there's lots of books you could access. I think that'd be very difficult to make something like that in India. So yeah, if you were to do things like that, that focuses on real life people, much easier if you're doing it abroad. And that's how we did Bad Boy Billionaires. That started off as a company in the UK. We were discussing how and what we could do for India. And because of the way they work, they're very journalistic and they're an Emmy-winning company. They were very clear on how the UK worked and not so wise about how India was very litigious. I'm not sure a show like that could be made again here, considering the ramifications of what happened when it was released. But it's really a lot easier to do things, I think, abroad of things that are in the public domain, much harder here. I think Jamshed would know more about the legal copyright and IP rights for there.
Jamshed, if you could add to that and also talk about how IP enforcement practices in India compared to those in the UK, particularly for the media and entertainment sector.
Let me in fact start with UK. I've always talked about India first, but let's start with UK. So they have, just as you have the Copyright Office, you have the Intellectual Property Office, which takes care of most filings. So you have an option. You can either go there or you go to the court. Of course, it's you have the small scale claims tribunal, which is any claim below, say, £10,000. And then, of course, once you sort of reach a figure of more than £500,000, you have the option of going to the Chancery Division of the High Court of England and Wales. And of course, Scotland has a similar provision where you can even go to the Sessions Court over there. So that's really how it sort of spans out. India, of course, both, in essence, the copyright, you have to first register. It's compulsory before the Copyrights Office. As we know, copyright, thanks to the various conventions, you have the benefit of it being applicable to so many countries around the world. So that's why getting a copyright done from the Copyrights Office in India, of course, it starts by you getting a diary number, and then it gets it comes up for objections, and you remove that, and then you finally get the copyright certificate. And that, of course, is valid usually for X number of years, and and then If it's an individual, till 60 years after his death. So that's the validity of the copyright as far as India is concerned.
Parveen, what challenges did you face in securing adaptation rights for the ABS-CBN film Seven Sundays, and how did you navigate the complexities while going about this project?
Okay, so I should put into AB, that studio that we're talking about is actually a Filipino studio, and we picked up the rights of a film that we absolutely loved, that we thought was going to be a great adaptation for India. We loved it that much that it took us 1 year to negotiate that deal. A lot of back and forth. We're a relatively new company, Creative Nation's relatively new, but same thing for the Philippines. They were coming into the India for the very first time as a studio. So for them, it was very new too. And I think the difference here was that India has multiple languages. So we're not dealing with one English language. It was new for them. They were trying to navigate this whole landscape. There were multiple languages at play. And then they had the original IP, and we wanted to have the underlying rights to make an adaptation here. A lot of back and forth. We actually did have a co-producer in India along the way, which we had to part ways because they did not understand derivative rights, that how would all this copyright play out. And it's actually quite simple. It looks a little complex, but it's not. They have an original story. We want to make an adaptation, which means we will have a very copyright protected product at the end of it. And those rights get very easily solved if you have a good legal team behind you. But it did take us a year. There were some issues on derivative rights, what they meant, what they would look like. We had other issues around the languages and making sure that we had first right of refusal, because we only took one language. Now, if you want to take all languages of India, it's going to cost you a lot more money. So you really have to think, what are you looking at as a producer? Going in for multiple languages is going to cost you more money. If you're just looking at, what you want to do with it, then that's fine. But you block off the other languages. That's what we did. It took us a while, but I think it was complicated, and yet it wasn't. We both wanted to make this deal happen, conceded on certain points, but ultimately if anybody was to ever look at our movie that's going to come out in the next couple of years and they like what we've done, our adaptation, which will be an elevated version of the original with songs, with an Indian adaptation, and they like that, they can come to us for remake rights, but they will also go back to the skeleton, to the source. So that there's two people involved here, which is really easy to do because we're both aligned. But that's IP for you. When you're going for an adaptation or licensing something like that, that's what you have to contend with. And we must have loved it because we did. We had 1 whole year of working towards that. We got there in the end.
Jamshed, what's your advice, when you have to deal with adapting rights, especially if it's, of an international project or a film?
No, so I'm presuming that if somebody is like, say, Parveen in India, and you are then negotiating with not just one country, say multiple countries. I mean that's fine, because this is also something that in today's sort of global scenario, you have companies which are registered all over the world in tax-free zones and things like that. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But the basics, as I love what Parveen said, it's at the end of it, it's not so complicated at all. The copyright laws, as you all know, copyrights is a bundle of rights. Adaptation rights are now form part of that. And therefore, they are to be negotiated as you would negotiate any other rights, whether it's derivative, personality, everything. The whole bundle is now, come together. This is very interesting because
Elaborate on derivative rights for the audience.
Yes. So as far as these are basically rights which arise as you sort of move along. For example, suppose there is a life story. And then there are rights which arise. There may be certain issues which arise. You may say that no, I don't think that I will use precisely what happened in the script, I would like to use certain, uh, scenarios which are slightly outside. So you're derivating it, you're moving it away from the original script. And are you permitted to do so? Of course you are. That's the creative, sort of talent of your writer and sometimes you have multiple, writers on a story, even when you go into OTT, etc. So that is something that. So is it permitted? Can you actually do so? The answer is, of course, you can. Everything can be licensed, and that's the amazing part about the creative industry. It allows for creativity within the law, and that's how the derivative and other rights. I was just about to say that all this has actually arisen because we moved from the American system to the French system including, again, a very interesting right called the moral rights, which it doesn't mean the dictionary meaning like at the end of an Aesop's fable, but it's another right. So as we go along, we'll actually explain. But it's very very simple. You must approach a lawyer when you do that, because you I mean quite or the legal department of your corporate who's handling it, because these things you don't sometimes the nitty gritties. A sort of a person who's deeply entrenched in the creativity may not have the time to actually look into. So,
No, that's absolutely right, Jamshed, especially with ours. I mean, creatively, I knew I loved the story. And we had somebody else who was on board because they too loved creatively the story. And they eventually could not do the 1 year of working towards unwrapping, repackaging the rights to get that to us. So you're absolutely right. It's your creative mind and then your legal team that really has to work together to make it happen. And I couldn't have done this without my legal team, because there is always new ways to crack a deal. There is no one set formula. And I think it really matters to have your legal team with you.
Parveen, you focus on both fiction and non-fiction content. How do you ensure that your projects, especially those based on real-life events or figures, comply with copyright law while maintaining creative integrity?
Now, again, so the creativity and then the legal side again. I think as a producer, you have to have a nose for a good story. And then you have to have, again, a good legal team that will protect you along the way. I'll give you an example of something that's actually coming up. Like it's very current right now. There's a book that is yet to be released. That's going to be released next year, I think around April 2025. It was given to me by a writer as, would you adapt this? And it's a real life story. It involves real life people, and it involves, without giving too much away, it's a big scam story, very current, true crime, very relevant. So straight away, creatively, and as a producer, you start saying, great, this is excellent. And then pause for a moment and think, okay, it's real life, real people. The first thing I would do is strategize with my lawyer and actually understand, what is this going to mean for me? Because we are dealing with a book, which is great because the book will be legally bomb-proof. That will be done before we even do that, right? So hopefully it is usually always done by the publisher. So by the time you are buying those book rights, along with that, I'll be getting the life rights and all the other rights for the author, because the story is told from her point of view. So there's multiple more rights that we have. So the book protects legally the narrative of what's going to happen. But on top of that, I will have to get the rights of the author, because she has told that story. So my first protocol was to Jamshed saying, okay, how do we do this now? I love the story creatively. Now you tell me exactly what's going to happen, because I can almost foretell this is going to be a very big story. You will not be able to miss it. And because it is true crime and it is a scam, we have to legally protect ourselves too, even though it's from a book. So then again, we were talking to Jamshed. I said, what does that mean in terms of insurances and going forward, what will that look like? And as a producer, for me, that means an extra line in the budget for bonds, insurances, legal, because it has the potential to go in that direction. But I hope I did answer that question well. So non-fiction, that's how we'll do it, because there's more additional rights involved. When it comes to fiction, if it's an original work, it's fairly straightforward. If again, it's a book that we're picking up or IP, and we do as a company, we're building our IPs. I find that book adaptation to film is much easier to get signed off. So again, legal's involved, and we make sure that the stories, if they're fiction, not that much of a problem to go through. But, yeah.
Jamshed, what are the legal implications in both cases, non-fiction and fiction?
So, okay, non-fiction is actually much simpler because it ensures that you don't have first and foremost, if it is a real life story, and so two scenarios. One is where the person is alive, and the second is if he has passed on. Okay, if he is alive, then you have to get the necessary sort of consent from him. I mean, there have been so many instances, and I don't even want to say this, where people have gone ahead and given consent to so many different potential filmmakers, and that's created a lot of sort of disputes in future, where others have said, well, you've given it to us, and what about us? Things like that. So that's the first and the most important. Ideally to get an affidavit in writing, sworn even before a notary. So that's then proof enough that you have it. That's number one. These are the things that, and this is not only so, for the protection of the producer, but even finally, even for the studio, because ultimately the studio needs proof that, you have the consent of the living person. Of course, if he has passed on, then you have an additional issue. You have to try and ensure that you get his legal heirs or his estate or somebody to sign off on this. That's one. Quite often, sometimes people are not even traceable. So then what happens is you put out a public notice in both. That's what we do in India. Sort of English and a regional language if it is over there, and then if you don't get any objections or from anyone, that is then that's fine, at least as far as the courts are concerned. They say that's okay, and then of course you sort of proceed along the way. A lot. I'll come back. A lot of litigation has stemmed from the fact that somebody was given his life story at one point of time, suddenly for monetary reasons, usually comes back once the trailer is out and goes to court and says that no, there's no fulfillment of the contract. So the contract itself, the main contract with that person, as you go along, has to be very, very watertight. And that is extremely important to ensure that, whoever it is and whatever, rights he has, they've been given and secured well before you actually start shooting. That is what I would advise.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think even with our, there was this very interesting case where, again, it was life rights of a cricketer, the estate, let's say, of a cricketer that had been purchased by an Indian producer here, all rights, everything neatly tied up. And yet there was a company in the US who was about to pick up the same story and had been developing the same story. And it was announced in the media. And of course, they were saying, well, it's public domain. And the producer here said, but I've paid the life rights. It was an interesting conundrum. Where do you go from that? Fortunately, they were able to fix it because of the people in between, and the US company backed down. But that was interesting because one was basing everything on public domain and what's available out there, and one had actually done the whole legal thing, crossed the T's and dotted the I's. But yeah, these things will happen going forward. So you have to be very, very careful and make sure you have all of your rights neatly tied up.
Jamshed, what's your view? I mean, if it's in public domain, can you go ahead and make a film?
Of course. I mean, that is also very clear and very obvious. You have to do your due diligence. You have to ensure that if it is in public domain, say for example, an Indian person who's sort of had his life plus say X number of years, sometimes 60, sometimes that's all mentioned. I don't want to get into this different sections of the Copyrights Act, but it's mentioned. So you need to check that. And if it is beyond that, then by all means. And what you also then do, just as from this is more from the legal perspective, but also the production company should be aware of. Put it out. Put out a public notice saying that we are doing this. It is in public domain. And if you have any objections for it, well, the good thing is nobody will write back. Or if there are objections, you get it right at the beginning, and you can sort it out. You don't have to wait right till the end. So you have to be very practical about these things.
Yeah, but I think I would be very, very nervous not having all the NOCs of all the people involved, especially if they're living. If I pick up a book of a famous star in the 70s and yet it's got so many other stars around it and I'm going to portray them, if I just change the name, it doesn't sit morally right with me. I'd want to cross it all off and have it all legally tied up. And actually, going forward, the networks are demanding that from you. They don't want any blowback. So the more paperwork you do at your end is going to be much easier going forward.
Parveen, have you come across any other disputes, contractual, relating to copyright in your experience?
Have I? I've been fairly lucky. There was not really. I've been quite lucky, but there was an instant where we had optioned some work. It wasn't specific. We'd optioned some work, and it didn't quite go as it was supposed to go. And eventually we had to put a public notice out saying that this is a project, we have worked on it, this is a lien against it. It was unfortunate, but sometimes you just have to do it to protect yourself, protect the company, and let the public know. So if that same project is then shopped around, that there is this attachment to it already. But other than that, no, not too many. I've been quite fortunate, not too many copyright infringements. But again, if there were to be, it would be you put a public notice out. You then could do a cease and desist going forward. That's very easy to do. You can send them by email, and then you follow through. And hopefully that'll bring the other person to the table and you can resolve things. Nothing like sitting across from somebody and resolving it. But sometimes it will take that legal notice to make them behave.
Jamshed, can you describe a copyright dispute you've resolved in either India or the UK? And what legal measures do you generally advise your clients when they are dealing with international projects?
So I think I'll start with two aspects. And today, of course, most courts, whether it's in India as well as not only in the UK, but even internationally, they do finally advise you because most are usually contractual, or even if it's copyright. Copyright is the only reason today that a matter actually needs to go to court. The rest of it can be actually resolved through the alternate dispute resolution mechanism, that is either through arbitration or even mediation now. And that's a much faster, quicker, more productive way of taking things ahead. But if it is unfortunately a copyright dispute, then you have no option. If it's on the civil side, you either go to the district court or to the four metros, the high court. So that's how you would sort of proceed. I don't want to repeat. I think Parveen has become at least more than half a lawyer. She said all the right things about getting the legal notice, the public notice out, etc. You would we very always strongly recommend that all these projects must get insurance, because that ensures that a defense cost and other costs can be claimed finally. So that's very good. In matters have, for example, there are matter where there were sort of one writer who claimed that this was her particular story at one point in time. And I was actually representing another writer who wasn't even aware that it was this person's story, because she was given a sort of a work for hire from a company, and she merely thought that this was, original script, and she was modifying it and things like that. So at the first round, of course, the single judge of the High Court held in the original scriptwriter's favor. It went to the division bench, which overturned it, and finally it went to the Supreme Court, which said, "Listen, you might as well, enough is enough. Sit down." And I think they worked out something very well, where the original writer, did get her due, her compensation, as well as, importantly, the credit. So I think it kind of worked out. But legal costs and time and money. So that is something that happened. And of course, the other thing that you also have to be very, very careful in today's day and age is the cyber fraud which happens. You see that I mean, in copyright, because there have been instances where you're recording something, and somebody comes and just takes a sharp copy and puts it out through a domain name across the world, and then all your contractual obligations with whether it's and look at it from a director's perspective also, studios and production house, and just completely. So then we have this whole concept, which is again universal, where you can get a John Doe order. It means an ex parte order against an unknown person, and then based on that, courts have time and time again actually granted injunctions, even against networks across the world, and they've taken the illegal, the infringing copies off. There's also the criminal side of it, okay, where initially earlier they used to actually confiscate the hard copies of cassettes and CDs, etc. Now, of course, it's mainly online, and that's in again an area that you work closely in connection with the police and the authorities to actually get it done.
Mhm.
Thank you so much, Parveen and Jamshed, for sharing your insights and making time for us this afternoon. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you.